I think this is also a very, very important topic. It's more or less like it's not as same as that your car has an airbag or seat belt and it will work when you need it. You need to keep testing, you need to keep checking. Most organizations don't do that. They assume that their HA environment will work when they need it, but they don't regularly test it. Can you talk about why is that assumption that hey, you know what, we have a very stable SDH setup which we tested once? Why is that assumption so risky, and what are the most common gaps that you see in HA validation today?
Great. Yeah, those are two great questions. Let me break them apart into two. First, it's a risky assumption when you're making changes, you're doing updates, even when you do the initial deployment, to think that everything's going to work fine without doing actual testing. During an actual outage or an emergency, that's not the moment that you want to discover that a backup service is misconfigured or incomplete, or that when you are doing maintenance that you forgot a step on the backup server, whereas you were able to validate things were running correctly on the production, but maybe you skipped an item. So assuming that it will work because it worked once is not a great strategy. It introduces a lot of risk to the business, a lot of risk that's unnecessary for the business. And when an emergency happens, that's when you discover those incompatibilities that leads to, as you mentioned in the intro, that leads to chaos, that leads to panic, that leads to business stakeholders wanting to understand what happened and what were the gaps. So testing and practice are critical components of business resilience planning. They show that you have a well-planned and thought-out solution when you're updating your servers, either through patch maintenance or you're doing updates to the application versions on upgrades. Doing that testing reduces the risk and helps you build muscle memory. So it's not just an exercise of will it work, but it's also an exercise of do we understand how to operate in an actual outage event, and gets you that muscle memory so that when an actual event happens, you're not going to panic. As far as the most common gaps I see, one of the worst gaps we used to see early on was the gap between customers that did nothing at all and those that did just something. And that always leads to panic when you do nothing. When you have done updates and you don't test a failover or switch over, when you've done upgrades of your application and you've not validated that they were updated correctly on both target and source. That gap used to be a really prevalent thing, and thankfully most customers realize that they have to do some validation. But I still see gaps with customers and their strategy for testing. The first gap that I notice a lot of is just the gap of not validating your actual architecture. So with the emergence of cloud and that usage growing and increasing, we see a lot of customers taking advantage of cloud resources and forgetting to validate in their architecture, did they have the right sizing for compute or network or storage? That's the first gap that I see, is just not understanding, are the systems identical in size? Are they both capable of handling the actual workload? And then once they have identified the architectural challenges and verified there are no gaps there's still gaps around failover or testing to make sure that client applications can connect. Some clients that we've worked with in the past simply wanted to check off, did their application or database or service start after a system failure test? But you have to take that a bit further. Having applications or services up and available on the server, the source or primary, or target or backup, whichever language you use, that's a great step. But if clients cannot connect to actually use that service, then you're not really available. And then lastly, I'd say that there are customers who tend to forget to validate what happens if their application crashes. They focus their testing solely on hard server outages, but they forget that applications also need to be validated. If they crash, can the HA software successfully recover it?